Oh yeah, maybe we'll do that. Okay,
That
we'll
should
start the
be
podcast now.
the intro.
Okay, everyone pause. Welcome to I don't know how to do this. Welcome to the Infamous Storyteller podcast. We will be covering chapter 17 of Moonless. It's going to be a good time. Um, yeah, so we're just going to go for it.
I'm gonna do it.
Fantastic.
Hi, I'm Joe. I read.
Oh,
I'm Brandon. I don't know how to read.
That's not true. Don't be dishonest. Okay. Why did it move? It moved.
do you have two mice plugged into your computer?
No, I don't. I have one mouse.
Is it updating? Because I did a bunch of work the other day.
No, that doesn't make sense because I clicked on the chapter heading. Like it doesn't. It starts me at the beginning every time,
Yeah.
and then I have to go to the chapter.
Yeah, but if it hasn't loaded the entire
Okay,
document
maybe
yet.
that might be the case. That may be the case. Let's try to get chapter 17, the Lich. Clarence pushed a squeaky wheelbarrow down the overgrown path towards the lighthouse. It was full of bones, skin fragments, and rotten flesh. He dumped the contents over the cliffside onto the crashing waves. He looked up the path, wondering when he'd get the chance to talk to the cursed girl again. This was proving to be one of the Necro Killer's longest visits, and he didn't like having to leave her alone for so long. With one last lingering look at the lighthouse window, Clarence grabbed the wheelbarrow and headed back to the keep. Back in the dungeon's filth cell, Clarence
Fifth.
scooped bones and garbage onto a tarp. You say something?
Yeah, just slow down a little bit. Look at the words.
Back in the dungeon's fifth cell. Oh, you're right. Filthy cell. Oh. Fifth cell. Clarence scooped bones and garbage onto a
That's
tarp.
unexpected.
I thought there were only 4.
There's
No, there was more than 4.
so this gets complicated. There's technically 5 because there's 2 cells on either side, and then there's the 5th cell in the back.
The one at the end, yes.
Yeah. In
We've
my
all been
head,
there.
there's only 3, but I wrote it in the book that there's 4.
So then why is there 5?
No, I wrote in the book that there's 5. That's right.
So in your head there are 3 cells.
Yeah.
In the book there are 5.
Yeah.
So there's 2 secret cells that the author isn't even aware of.
Yeah, well, this kind of stuff
hidden
happens.
window.
Shayla would be able to speak more to this because, like, I wrote the whole layout, and then Shayla came back and edited things and changed the layout of all the buildings. So I don't know what is anymore.
He ruined your mind, Palace.
Really, though, it got really confusing in here.
You sit down to meditate and you're like, come off the sofa.
Exactly. No joke.
Okay. Man.
We digress.
Good gravy. Back in the dungeon's 5th cell. He was almost done with cleaning up the remainder of the splicelings and their leftover parts. But this task was far from over. In the very back of the cell was a massive well, filled to the brim with bones. The well looked to be as wide as he was tall, and Clarence didn't know how deep it went. He wasn't willing to use his necromancy to fill through the mess and find out. His brief inspection revealed that the bones were pristine, almost like they'd been bleached. He hoped the Necro Killer wouldn't make him dig them all out, though he most likely would. Clarence wished he had bleach to wash the stones clean. The floor was stained and clearly hadn't been scrubbed in a while. But there was no bleach, so he had to settle with buckets upon buckets of seawater that the dead mage brought him. Brought him? Oh, right, because there's a dead mage.
Yeah, dead mage.
The dead mage.
Good
The
job.
salt
Good
water-
job.
Yes, good job. The salt water washed down the water ducts, which were cut in the cobble floor along the cells. They ran down each side of the hall, the ducts coming together in the 5th cell, then emptying into the bone pit. Clarence thought about everything he'd scrubbed off into the pit and hoped again that he wouldn't be forced to clean it. Setting his shovel down, he picked up the 4 corners of the tarp and started to carry it up to his wheelbarrow. Right as he was leaving, he heard a hollow clacking sound coming from the cell. Instinctively, he turned back, expecting to see the dead mage, but then remembered he was gone fetching more buckets of water from the ocean. Hair prickling on the backs of his arms, Clarence swiped his nose and took a quick look at his mana. It was only a third full. Getting rid of the screen, he started back to the stairs, stepping a little more quickly. Once again, clacking echoed down the hall. He glanced back and this time saw something sitting up in the far corner of the cell next to the bone pit. It was humanoid in shape and turned its ivory white skull towards him, skin flaking off its face, piercing eyes locking with Clarence's. The second they made eye contact, it grinned and started getting to its feet. Hair all over Clarence's body was standing on end, and he made a dash for the stairway. "Wait!" A cold and echoey voice hissed at him. There's echoes, but I can't do that manually. But Clarence was... Wait. But Clarence was not waiting for anything. He
Come
darted up...
back!
Come back, I'm friendly! He darted up the stairs and almost ran over the dead mage, bumping into him, spilling water down the steps. At the top of the stairs, he slammed the big oak door shut. He then picked up the old wooden plank that sat next to the door and slid it in the brackets on either side, locking the mage and whatever the thing was inside. This is different from what I remember. Heart pounding, Clarence ran through the hallway and the stairs to the ballroom. The necrokiller was gone. Clarence searched the kitchen. The necrokiller wasn't there either. Dread filled Clarence, and he turned to the hooks at the doorway. The old wooden broom and the necrokiller used for his trips was gone. Bum, bum, bum. Just when you thought you couldn't get enough of him. A pounding sound came from the bowels of the mansion as something beat against the old oak door. He looked up in the direction of the sound, eyes narrowed. He gave his nose a swipe, taking a glance at his bar. He didn't like what he saw. He paced the kitchen. The necrokiller was gone, so this situation was probably very bad. There's a chance that it could be just another one of those necrokiller's creatures, but the deep unease in his gut made him reluctant to take the risk. Something about that skeleton made his skin crawl. Perhaps it was the lack of skin. He straightened his shoulders. Necrokiller's minion or not, it didn't matter. The necrokiller wasn't there, and whatever happened next would be left to Clarence. Mind made up, he turned and headed out of the kitchen. After hastily gathering a stack of history books from his alcove, Clarence dashed to the lighthouse and climbed up the stairs, calling to the girl. "Are you awake? You awake? Wakey, wakey." He heard some shuffling, then the girl appeared on the other side of the cell. She looked at him drearily. "You came back. I thought something had killed and eaten you." He grinned at her in what he had hoped was a reassuring way. "No, not yet. I brought you some more books, and a question. Your father was a necromancer, right?" "He is a necromancer," she corrected. "Oh, yes, sorry. That's what I meant," he repeated, trying not to sound too impatient. "Did he teach you anything about skeletons that can talk?" The little girl cocked her head to the side, scratching it like she had just gotten out of bed. Bad necromancy makes talking skeletons." She nodded to herself as if recalling a far-off memory. "Yes, he said that they were very bad, like monsters under the bed." "Anything else?" he pressed. She shrugged, eyes on the books in his hands. "Are those for me?" "Here." Clarence set them at the floor in front of the gate. The little girl grabbed them, smiling. Do you remember anything else about them?" "About the books? I mean, I haven't read them yet," she said softly. "Not the books." The girl looked up at him, startled by the stern tone of... No, not the books! How did he say it? Author. "Not the books."
Not the
"Do you
book.
take the name in the goblet of fire?" he said calmly.
Well, go on.
"I'm sorry, I meant, do you remember anything else about the skeletons?" She looked up at him with a little petulantly and shrugged her shoulder. "Nope, they're just bad." She picked up one of the books and started to flip through it. Great. He glanced at his mana bar, hoping maybe it had moved up a little bit. It hadn't. "Well, I have one sort of trapped. I'm gonna lock you in the tower so it can't get to you." "I'm already in jail," the girl mumbled as she ripped a page of the book and began drawing on it with a stick that she dipped in the grime of the lighthouse floor.
Ooh.
Ew. She started to hum softly to herself, lost in whatever imaginative world she disappeared to. Aware he'd already risked too much time, Clarence left her, rushing out of the lighthouse, then shutting the door. He ripped a dead vine from the lighthouse wall and placed it against the center of the door and hurriedly began chanting. 5 large vines sprouted from the center of the vine, spreading out and digging their tendrils into the door frame, and stone wall. The end result looked like a giant wooden starfish that was set deep into the door and the lighthouse around it. The door would not be moving any time soon. Clarence looked at his mana bar to see what he had left to work with. His heart sank. There was only a sliver left on the last tick. What was he thinking? He thought it'd take a chunk, but this? A new line popped up from the bottom of his page. Crude spell acquired. Manipulate vines. End tutorial. New spells were always more costly. He groaned. He should have ripped off a part of a tree instead, but how was he supposed to know that a vine was different enough from a tree to require a whole new spell?
Well, I mean, it was alive,
It was alive.
so
That's a good point, too.
He glared at the words "End tutorial" as the screen blipped out of view as he resisted the urge to punch something. One day he was going to meet the good angel again, and then he was going to tell her exactly what he thought of her tutorials. Looking forward to it. Leaving the lighthouse.
Try the other USB port. Apologies.
Yeah, and then flip it upside down if it's not fitting. Sometimes it takes 2 times. It's a rule. Leaving the lighthouse, Clarence walked back to the mansion and stopped in the entryway. The pounding hadn't stopped and echoed up the hall from the stairway that led to the dungeons. He paced there, trying to decide what to do, occasionally swiping at his nose, hoping that his mana had miraculously started to recover. A splintering crack echoed through the room, shaking him out of his thoughts and drawing all of his attention to the dark hallway. Realizing that the time to decide was past, Clarence rushed down to the dungeon, prepping his final bit of mana to seal the door shut. As he pivoted down the stairs, he arrived just in time to see the white bony fingers of the skeleton reach through the doorframe and pull itself through the splintered door. It turned to him, one hand still on the door and the other holding a pitted prison bar, obviously taken from one of the cells. It turned to Clarence, skull frozen in a terrifying grin. "I need you," it announced eerily, then rushed him. Clarence chanted, dumping the rest of his mana into the skeleton's neck, only to have it swept away with a much greater force. He ran. He didn't get farther than 10 steps before the skeleton was on him, catching him by the back of the neck and jerking him back. He struggled, trying to rip its ivory fingers from his neck, but it was no use. Cackling happily to itself, the skeleton dragged him back down to the dungeon entrance. They continued through the door, past what was left of the dead mage, now a beaten, oozing pulp discarded at the top of the stairs. Clarence didn't have time to do much more than feel a slight rise in his stomach at the sight as the skeleton didn't stop, rushing them past the row of cells and into the 5th cell in the back. An increasing panic began to fill Clarence as the skeleton pushed them to the back of the cell, and then, with a rough thrust, it propelled Clarence forward, and he found himself crashing into the bone pit. The bones clattered and clinked, shuffling and shifting beneath him. Clarence screamed, scrambling for the ledge. The skeleton regarded his efforts, then lifted its foot and stomped him down into the bone pit. Clarence curled up into a ball, heart palpitating, so terrified he could hardly breathe. As he rapidly fell through the shifting bones, somebody put a period where it didn't need a period, I think.
Yeah.
Pacing is weird there.
Probably need to get rid of the. I'll just highlight it.
As he rapidly fell through the shifting suddenly stopped. He was pinned, unable to move beneath the great pile. This was it. He was going to die. Then, suddenly, something grabbed his ankles and pulled him to the side, out from under the horrid mass. He blinked his eyes open, and the dim light looked up to see the grinning face of the skeleton as it dragged him through a wet and grimy sewer-like hallway. Nearly on the right side of the hall, Clarence caught sight of a flickering light emanating from a cracked door. The skeleton pulled the door open and shoved Clarence forward into a dusty plush armchair in the middle of what looked to be a small study or library. Dazed at the sudden turn of events, it took Clarence a moment to catch his breath, and he glanced around the room and immediately regretted it. The room's walls were full of anatomy drawings of creatures and people spliced together. Notes jotted down in flowing cursive covered the sketches. Ignoring Clarence, the skeleton took its skin-flaked skull and set it on the desk facing Clarence. Then the body walked out of the room, shutting the door. A moment later, Clarence heard a bolt slide in place, then the clatter of bones clacking against a stone floor. A voice emanated from the skull, making Clarence jump. "They went that-a-way." Just kidding. "I need your body," it stated, voice echoing eerily from inside the empty skull. Clarence looked at the skull in shock. "You will relinquish it to me," the skull hissed. "No, I'm good, but thanks?" He realized that probably wasn't a situation to be polite in, but the shock of the last several hours had him resorting back to his Midwest niceties. "I'm good, thanks." The skull clattered its teeth in seeming frustration. "Take the dagger out of the drawer and cut your hand and then touch me." "Touch me!" it shrieked. Oh, a knife, Clarence thought. Good. He scooted forward and pulled open the drawer that sat beneath the skull. A dagger that had to come off a Hollywood demonic prop set lay unsheathed and gleamed darkly in the candlelight. Clarence took the knife briefly, hefted it in his hand, and then, with a strong, swift motion, brought the point of the knife down onto the skull. The point skidded down its face and entered through the left eye socket, pinning the skull to the table. Crossguard pinned against the eye socket. Ooh. He gave the knife an experimental wiggle. It was well lodged into the table. Deciding maybe that wasn't the worst outcome, Clarence let go of the dagger and sat back in the chair. Then, as an afterthought, he lifted slightly and scooted the chair backwards until it hit the bookcase running along the back wall. After a slight pause, the skull spoke again, its teeth still managing to clack despite it being pinned to the table. "You're not very intelligent, are you?" it hissed. "You can't kill a lich with a dagger, even one that has cut the hearts from 1,000 innocents. I will get your body, your bones. Starvation is not a pleasant way to go," it cackled. "I'm sure with time you'll come to agree." This was starting to get over his shock, and addressed the skull in what he hoped was a cool manner. "I'm going to get a bat and smash your head. Then, if you're still talking, I'm going to grind you to dust." The skull rattled in irritation as it responded. "What madness! There's nothing for you to crush me with. I've barred the door. There is no escape. Just give me your body. It's not like you won't get to stay in it." I don't do roommates. Clarence was sure he couldn't trust the thing, and that said, if it wasn't a lie, being stuck with that voice in his head would be a fate worse than death. No, Clarence decided the only thing in this room that would inhabit his body would be the maggots and worms of his corpse, and that wouldn't be without him exhausting every other option. "What is this room?" Clarence asked. "My private study." "You're the owner of the mansion, then," Clarence said. Understanding was beginning to dawn on him. "I am, and I will reclaim it. Cut yourself and you will become one with me. We will be on—" Clarence cut the talking head off as a new thought came to him. "So you're the one that made the mess upstairs." "What about the girl in the tower?" "She is the perfect trap to kill a man." The skull somehow managed to beam despite lacking much by of facial tissue. "Now pick up the knife and slit your wrists." "Is she healable?" Clarence asked thoughtfully, rubbing the side of his head. Just not caring. The skull was quiet for a long moment before answering, clenched jaw shifting from side to side like it was thinking. "I mean, it is possible, yes. Slice yourself and touch me, touch me, touch me. Then I will show you. Yes, yes." Clarence adjusted himself in his seat. No, I'm still good. How would you heal her?" "Get the dagger! Cut, cut, cut!" it shrieked. How do you heal the girl in the tower?" Clarence asked again. The skull's tone as it answered was clearly exasperated. "It's missing its heart. It needs a new one." "No!" Clarence cut him off again, feeling more and more secure in the fact that he hadn't been killed yet. What kind of heart? He waited for its response, praying it wasn't going to say it needed the heart of another little girl. You and me both, man. Clarence, it paused for a second, seemingly lost in thought. A dragon. Any wormling's heart will do. Its tone turned introspective, almost like it was mumbling to itself. Neutralized by weaver magic, of course, but we don't need to fix it. We'll just kill it! Now cut, cut, cut! It shrieked. Clarence tried to ask more questions, but the skull kept screeching, cut, 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 hysterically, after what felt like an eternity. Clarence finally recovered a few clicks of mana. He stood up and began to hum. The armchair's wooden arm rotted away, and at two ends he pulled the middle section free. Then he grew the larger end into a gnarled club. He lifted it experimentally, then added a little bit more weight to the end until he felt satisfied with its heft. The skull was still screeching, cut, 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 when he smashed it. Bone shards flew everywhere, scattering across the room. The shrieking stopped, and for the first time in hours, the room was silent. The light flickered, and Clarence realized the candle was close to going out. He searched around and found a few more candles in the drawer, stuffed in a silk bag. He pulled one out and lit it with the existing candle. He tried opening the door, but true to the creature's word, it was barred from the outside and wouldn't budge. Clarence looked at his mana bar. Not much left. He pressed his fingers against the wooden door and cast Rot. The wooden door's surface crumbled and withered a bit, but it didn't do much to its overall integrity. Clarence settled back in his armchair and got comfortable. As he waited a few more hours for his mana to build back up, Clarence skimmed through the books. They were almost all on splicing creatures and humans together to make different kinds of undead monsters. Not the most pleasant of reads. It didn't help that the scrawling handwriting made it hard to understand the text in the first place. Most of the books were experiment logs and were written in a shaky cursive that was very difficult to decipher. Clarence selected a book that covered the topic of splicing dragons and humans and tried to work his way through it, all while wearing the skin off his nose as he tapped to check his mana. He didn't want to be there any longer than necessary. Finally, many hours later, with a full mana bar, he pressed his hand against the door frame and began chanting. The wood strongly resisted his coaxing, but he focused hard, forcing the stubborn wood around the latch to rot and crumble beneath his will. His mana bar drained to nothing in moments. Then his pop-up appeared. New Hex, Rot Spiderwood. Rot Spiderwood. Spell type crude. This is a complex and very costly spell. End tutorial. I sure wasn't joking when it said the spiderwood was costly. This was why people wanted spiderwood so bad? He hadn't even noticed what it was. The silver grains were so covered in dust, he assumed it was enchanted or hexed bog oak. Looking closely at the door, he saw that it was not nearly as rotten as he hoped, only a small circle around where his hand had been touching close to the handle. Deciding that wasn't going to work by itself, he took his improvised club and began to beat on the latch and the bolt until they finally gave way. The door swung out into the sewer. On the other side of the door was a pile of bones scattered across the wet floor, the remains of the skeleton. The dark hall took a sharp turn and continued down to his left. Clarence took a candle and walked back to the pit of bones. The bones were encased in a brick cylinder, just like the inside of an old well, rising up 7 or so feet to the tunnel's roof. There was a closed metal gate in the front which held the bones from tumbling out, the same one Clarence was pulled through. He didn't have a spell or skill that had shuffled the bones to let him down, nor did he want to replicate that experience again. So instead, Clarence unlatched the gate and gave a tug on the bones that held them in place. They poured from the well at his tug, sounding like some macabre marimba as they knocked into each other and across the stone floor. Hydration. Drinking. There were a lot of bones, and Clarence had to shove them further down the tunnel to keep them pouring out of the well. Once it was mostly empty, he climbed into it and was dismayed to find the top of the well to be 40 feet high with polished, smooth stone walls. Clarence clambered back out. He was going to have to wait until he got his mana back so he could start growing his club up the side of the tunnel.
I like to point out that it is very druid-like that he is creating life, essentially.
Well, it's dead.
It's, well,
Well, he's growing
he's
an
growing it.
organic material.
Yeah. Yeah, his
Sure, it's dead now, right? But I mean, he's still altering the mass of it by using magic to add mass.
I wish it was that easy when working out. Just, I win. That's kind of how they did it in Aragon.
Oh,
In the
wait.
second or third,
Did it
yeah, in the second or third book, Aragon he
gets
meets up with,
transformed?
well, he meets up with the dwarves, and the dwarves are like, "We're so freaking cool. We screw brass knuckles into our knuckles." Well, not really brass knuckles, but they do. They have knuckled gauntlets that drill into their hand bones. But because their hand bones are so big and sturdy, they can do that. And he was like, "That's pretty cool. I'd like to do that." And they're like, "Your wimpy human hands won't work." And he's like, "Okay, whatever." So then he uses magic to make his bones thicker and denser in his hands, so he can punch stuff barehanded more. So that happens. I don't remember what book though.
What an emo teen, right? Well, I mean, he
Kinda.
does lose like a lot of family.
He goes through a lot. They've released another, or will, I don't know. This guy keeps putting out books. I thought Inheritance was the last one. There's another other one
One could have
that
hoped.
either is coming out or has. I don't know. I tried to reread the first book. It didn't go well.
I
Didn't have the
enjoyed the first book, the
I know,
first
me
read.
too. The first read was good because I was young and reading for the first time in my life when words were new. Uh,
Probably he returned to the study.
He returned to the study, walking over thousands of bones, the lich's skeleton lost somewhere in the wave that had poured out of the well. Clarence settled into the armchair and waited once again for his mana bar to refill. He broke the armchair, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yep, just
Like,
busted
I
it
thought
straight
he
up, no cap.
No,
totally
no,
bro-
no.
I
He,
thought
he took the arm off of the armchair.
Hmm.
You can scroll back and look.
I'm going to check. I
He
felt
broke
like
the door and he took the arm from the armchair.
No, I thought he.
So he rotted two sides of the arm of the armchair and then grew that
Oh.
chunk out
Okay.
and
Okay.
smashed
Okay.
the skull. Yeah.
Boom. Get wrecked. That was delightful.
Yeah. So that's the
That was
end of
great.
chapter 17.
That was great.
It was fun. It was a fun chapter to
It
write.
was a fun read. It was a good read. Your thoughts, Brandon?
Good read.
Good
It's a
read.
good read.
Good read. Vintage.
Vintage. Not as
Ooh,
old as
just-
we hoped.
Not as old. It's a classic, or will be. It will be. It tastes like it's going to be a classic.
It'll be the last book they find from our.
It tastes like it's
in
going
a
to age
thousand
well.
years, it'll be the only thing they find on some
The only
like flash
the only-
drive.
The only
It's like the
remnants of
remnants
humanity.
of this era of time, and they're like, these people were crazy.
What the heck? Story of this weird dude fighting other dead dudes. Dude,
It's kind of weird.
that kind of freaky deaky, you know, man. Right. The next chapter is chapter 18, Capture. Do we have any questions, comments, concerns? Just kidding. You have to put it in the comments, and I've already recorded it, so too late. Silva leaned on a railing, looking out over the bog. She was on the 5th viewing platform, which jutted out from the floating island. Why do you keep using numbers that are hard?
What do you mean? Fifth is not a
Numbers.
hard word to say. Well, fifth is fifth actually a
Fifth.
number? It's
Fifth.
actually it's not a number.
It's not a number. It's a
It
place.
represents the fifth out of a row of 5 things.
Or a section, a one of 5 things.
One of 5 things, yes.
Yes, or something that is in 5th place, because you could have a 5th piece of the 10-piece puzzle,
Yeah.
right? So it's
Represents 1 of 5. Or 1 up to 5.
Yeah. She was on the 5th viewing platform, which jutted from the floating city's base. The Red Cloaks were all but gone, as well as most of the council. Apparently, an extremely dangerous prisoner had escaped Tarbeth and was slinking around in the bog. They were down there now looking for him. Is this a flashback? This is a flashback. Her father would have been with them, but was still fighting off the smaller Titan eels. He was hell-bent on punching his way through them, just so he could get across the ocean to rediscover the continents that were said to lay beyond. If it were any other man, Silva would have laughed in their face, but her father was the most powerful man in the world. He toppled the old government and then started dragging eels from the sea. Nothing could stand in his way. Over time, he always won. Who is this person?
It's
beautiful, isn't it?
yes.
Yes, it's this guy.
Yes.
Hey, it's me. Startled, Silva turned to find a tall, thin man standing behind her. He was dressed well, freshly shaved in a dueling suit made from what appeared to be a black dragon leather. He looked past her.
He looked past. I'll highlight it.
No, I will fix it.
Okay.
Dude, fixed it. Wow. Those homophones, they'll get you. He looked past her towards the bog and its massive trees that stood like skeletons in the cool of the late fall. It looked better 5 weeks ago, she remarked curtly. He inclined his head with a polite smile, ignoring her tone. Am I right in assuming you are Miss Silva? He asked. Yes. Do I know you? The man seemed familiar, but in a city as large as Garthulin, there are any number of places where they could have crossed paths. No, I just thought I recognized you. Albion the Great's daughter. She bristled at the mocking edge of his voice. It was gutsy and annoying. Do you keep that tone with the High Mage himself? She snapped. Not recently. He's avoided me over the past few years. Actually, I came to see him, but it seems he's out of town. She narrowed her eyes. The man was impudent. She eyed his lanky frame with scorn. Albion didn't avoid people. People avoided him. This scarecrow certainly wouldn't make Albion even bat an eye. She doesn't know. She doesn't know. Everyone knows he's... Is this...
Oh.
Who's...
This is Silva.
Everyone knows he's been gone for the... Everyone knows he's been gone to the East Coast for months. He's due to return at any time.
Ah, yes. He's in New Jersey.
Albion was supposed to be back 3 months ago. More likely, he found himself another wife and was taking things easy between his bouts with the Titan Eels. It wouldn't be the first time. That's very Zeus of him. Silva just hoped it wouldn't be someone her age. That was always uncomfortable. Either way, hopefully her father would keep the girl on one side of his estates and the other tertiary wives would not bring the woman home. With his other tertiary wives and would bring the woman home. Silva didn't want to see or deal with the inevitable fallout from her mother. There was a polite cough from the man in front of her, and she blinked, realizing that she'd just gotten lost in thought. Sorry, what did you say? She asked. The man looked at her with a slight grin, making her stomach coil, and she resisted the urge to back away. I was saying that I'm an old friend of your father's. He clasped his hands behind his back. I've been gone for some time now. Coming back has been freeing. He smiled softly, looking over the forest, and this time it seemed to have become lost in thought, humming idly to himself as he stared at the leafless trees.
Is that right?
I think that looks right. Leafless.
I'm
Yeah,
dumb and don't know how to spell, so I highlighted it.
you're infamous for that.
Yes, yes. That's kind of the point.
Yes, the infamous storyteller.
He's not called the infamous story writer, people. Come on.
It's
It's
true.
just tellers.
I
Yeah,
just tell
he
him.
doesn't even. I tell the stories. Isn't this such the irony this is?
This is what they call a grift.
This is what you're here for, people.
Anyway.
I'm his ghost narrator. I
Ghost
don't even get
teller.
paid. I'm not even an intern. Ghost teller. I don't tell ghost stories. No.
No, I just tell other people's stories.
I tell other people's stories. Not even pretending to be someone else. I tell other people's stories for someone else who isn't Never mind.
Don't think about it.
You know what? Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Oh my cotton socks! Sorry.
That's a weird exclamation.
Yeah, no,
Like, as in you have cotton socks, or you just trying out that new term?
no, I think I
Oh,
actually
my
do.
cotton socks, you've returned.
But Cade from Destiny says, "Oh my cotton socks, say something."
And he does say that because he's alive. Good times.
Good times. Did you hear about? Oh, I digress. We're not going to talk about
We're
that.
digressing heavily, and
Yeah,
no, we're not sponsored by Destiny. Get out of the comments.
We can cover that after we're done with the podcast.
We can cover that in our Destiny 2
Yeah, that's why I
episode. Stay
stopped
tuned.
myself from talking.
Silva looked over the forest as well, hoping he would leave. A deep throbbing began to build up in her neck, and she groaned. She couldn't afford another bad headache. She had a meeting in a few hours with the members of the council. Deciding to hang social niceties, she turned from the balcony to head inside when suddenly a wave of lightheadedness overcame her. She stumbled against the stone railing of the balcony and would have fallen if the long arms of the man hadn't caught her. She looked up at his face in confusion, his face losing focus as her vision faded. She was vaguely aware that he was humming, even as she drifted off into the blackness. Ooh, she didn't know. He was just humming Another One Bites the Dust. When Silva came to, her head was throbbing. She immediately closed her eyes again as light poured into them. She paused for a minute, becoming deeply aware that something was wrong. The mattress she was on was hard and lumpy, and there was a slight scent of mildew in the air. Cautiously, she opened her eyes, and instead of seeing the light blue of her bed's canopy, she was greeted with the cracked plaster and peeling wallpaper. Immediately alarmed, Silva shot up out of bed, and just as immediately regretted it as a wave of dizziness hit her, and she quickly lowered herself down to avoid passing out again. Sit up slowly. Silva turned her head to the deep voice.
Sit up slowly.
Yeah, it doesn't work
Silva
with the voice.
turned her head. She followed the deep voice, the deepest of voices, smoothest and deepest of voices, and saw the lanky silhouette of a man seated in the large windowsill. The man from the balcony stared back at her, the same polite smile on his face. Silva's blood ran cold, and she flung her hands and arms into action, ready to send flaming metal shards through the man's face. Nothing happened. Puzzled, she flicked her wrists again. When nothing happened a second time, she looked down at her hands. There, circling each wrist, were twin black chains, delicate, weightless, crippling. Mage manacles. She looked back at the man, trying to fight the wave of terror that was threatening to envelop her. Albion did you a great disservice by not allowing you to be trained by me. You didn't know you were under a hex, he tutted, shaking his head. No matter. You're here now. It will be an uphill climb, but with your heritage, I'm sure you'll have no trouble learning how to duel a necromancer. Who are you? Silva stammered. The man smiled grimly. I'm your father's black hand, as well as your mother's first husband. Before my best friend took her from me, that is. I'm, of course, Galdorn, the Necro Killer. Certainly you've heard of me. Heard of him? His name was a curse in her house. The second his name was mentioned, her mother would reach for a wine decanter and her father would go out and find something to kill or another woman to wed.
Oh, oh! Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
just enjoying the lore dumping going on here.
he's a player. And not only had she heard of him, she watched him die in the prologue. The
In the
prologue.
flesh.
In the flesh.
I
She
saw
was
him
there
die.
IRL.
Yeah.
No cap, chat. No cap. He unalived IRL.
Wow.
Don't you dare lie. Who are you? She demanded. Your mother has a birthmark. Your mother has a birthmark on her lower back, the width of my hand. The man brushed the air in front of him.
Coincidence?
As for your father, he also has an identical birthmark.
They're twins. It's disgusting. I'm so sorry for you.
What?
I'm not good with words. As for your
They're,
father,
they're not
during the
actually
Battle of
related.
Black
Just
Dust-
to clear that up, that was a
They're
joke.
not. They're not. That's not. Nope. Don't. Hey, get out of the comments. No. 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 Leave. Thank you. Okay. As for your father, during the Battle of Black Dust, he lost his ring finger.
Ring finger.
Linger. Guys, reading out loud is hard.
It is, yeah, yeah.
He lost his ring finger on his left hand. That's not his voice.
That's not his.
Most don't know how he lost it. The druid Findel cut it clean with an arrow. Let's go find out. Findel? Findel.
Findel, yeah.
Those prove nothing, Silver retorted. Everyone knows my mother's birthmark. I know the Necro Killer is dead. Albion killed him. It's not even her voice. I'm just... Albion killed him.
You're just
That's not a
flip flopping
voice
between the
either.
two because it's just so high intensity.
Please. The thin man stood up. Like Albion would have killed me. He betrayed me after I killed the last of those bloody splicers that remained from the rotten husk of the Necromancer coven. I would have killed him as soon as I found out he was sleeping with my wife, but we were at war. He only beat me because my mana was all but depleted at the time, you know. The man paused. He should have killed me. Silva stared at the man. He hated her father, and whether she believed it or not, she had no doubt that he believed he was the Necro Killer. Having hard times pronouncing. Silva didn't want to think of what the man would do to her to get back at her father. The man's expression softened, looking down at her. None of that's your fault, of course. None of us have control over who our parents are or what they do. He let out a long sigh. I will get you caught up on your defense against necromancy. We'll move forward from there. Why? There must be something else you want. I'm bait to bring my father in, leverage. Don't lie to me. She looked at him, daring him to lie again. The man shook his head. He doesn't care that much about you, girl. I'm sorry to be the one to break it to you, but your father's a narcissist. No, just me. He's much more into avenging deaths than preventing them. If I wanted to seriously do harm to him, people would not be how I would go about it. Oh, I get it now. The man looked out the window again, eyebrows drawn in a puzzled expression. He was clearly searching for something. Something's off, he muttered. The island feels dark, and the boy isn't where I left him. He turned back to her and offered her a hand. Come with me. I need to see what the boy is up to, and I think it's best you leave here alone. Eyeing him balefully, Silva scooted off the bed without his help and followed him out of the room. She couldn't possibly imagine what would be making the place feel so dark. It was falling apart and inhabited. And uninhabited?
Inhabited.
Oh. It was falling apart and inhabited, if he was to be believed, by the most terrifying man to ever live. Of course it felt dark. He's emo. The Necro Killer led her through... Have you heard of, My Chemical Romance? I'm kidding. The Necro Killer led her through a few hallways, through a small bedroom. Sorry. Then down another flight of stairs. He stopped abruptly at the base and regarded a door on the other side of the small room that was splintered and broken. That is not a good sign. Stay close. He pulled the door open and began walking down more stairs. Sylvia didn't know what was going on, but she didn't like his uncertainty. She went to follow him, slipped on something on the stairway, and would have fallen down the stairs if the necrokiller hadn't reached up to stable her. She looked down to see what she stepped on and screeched. A corpse, bloodied and beaten, lay crumpled at her feet. The necrokiller's frown intensified, looking more concerned. I wondered what had happened to you, the necrokiller muttered. I'll have to find another red cloak. She looked at him in alarm, but he was already moving down the last few steps and leading them through what appeared to be a dungeon. He headed straight to the largest cell in the back, past 5 large empty tables. In the corner was a large pit, and as they peered over the edge, Silva could catch the slightest glimpse of white at the bottom. The necrokiller grimaced. Of course he had a bone elevator. That implies regular elevators exist. He turns to Silva.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
Saying elevator implies the existence of an elevator.
Yeah.
Please insert an elevator into this book.
I did. Right there.
No, but like another elevator where it's like, oh no, we're both in the same elevator. How awkward.
This is
We're a
awkward.
mortal enemy.
I should do that. That would be hilarious.
Albion and the necrokiller meet in an
Elevator.
Oh, no, this is my fault.
Oh, I really want to do that now.
Presses all the buttons and walks out. That's what he would do.
Go on.
It's about the journey, not the destination. The necrokiller grimaced. Of course he had a bone elevator. Just for emphasis. He turned to Silva. I'm going to have to deal with this. This way. He led her back to the first cell at the base of the steps. It was clean, with a neat cot, fresh straw. The necrokiller unlocked the gate and moved her in, then shut it, locking it securely. I think we have a lich on our hands. I'll be back. And with that, he headed up the stairs and disappeared.
No. He's got to say, I think we have a lituation. I'm sorry.
A lituation.
That's
We
great.
have a bit of a lituation.
On our hands.
I don't know why, but I feel like he would say it with his.
I'm going to go get the gun.
I'm going to go get the gun.
We have a lituation on our hands. Yes, what?
In one hand, I have thunder, and the other hand, I have lightning. And those are my guns. 1911. God bless America. Okay, and with that, he headed up the
As
stairs.
the boy
and
says.
disappeared. As the boy says, whoever America is, he will be blessed, that America. Silva watched him in alarm and was trying to process what exactly was going on when he returned shortly later with a rope. He walked off into the back cell and started looking around. Seemingly finding what he was looking for, the man bent over, his body obscuring her view. After a moment, he stood, pulling on what she assumed was the rope. Nodding to himself in satisfaction, he stepped forward, then suddenly was gone. Still in shock, Silva lowered herself to the cot, knees shaking. Closing her eyes, she forced herself to take several deep breaths. Excuse me.
What?
The
Carry
dank,
on.
rotting smell of her breath made her want to gag. Sorry.
Her breath?
The dank, rotting smell made her want to gag. Of the cell. I'm kidding. But also brought her some clarity. This was a bad situation. But she was the High Mage's daughter. Nothing like hierarchy to make you feel better about yourself.
Exactly.
This wasn't her first time in a bad situation, and with enough time, she could get herself out. Silva started eyeing the inside of her cell, the beginnings of a plan starting to form in her mind.
Murder.
Murder. We have a bit of a lituation.
And we have a bit of lituation.
That would be a great-
Joe, you've got to turn that into a t-shirt.
We
or
have
a
a bit of
sticker.
lituation.
We have a
I
bit
can-
of a lituation.
As a short, and someone please animate this. You'd have Galdorn walk up to Clarence and be like, "Oh, Clarence, good news. We have a bit of a lituation. Get the gun."
God bless America.
God bless America, as you say.
I'm
Bless
imagining him say tally ho.
Tally ho.
Jolly ho and all that.
I know that. Geronimo.
So that was the end of chapter 18.
Yeah. That was a good chapter. That was fun. I
That's
can't
fantastic.
remember. Are you still doing the?
Spoilers?
I guess there's. I'm not trying to spoil it.
I know.
Does Clarence, does
Spoil
he?
things?
Does he? Well, we'll have to read to find out. I have no idea
I
what you're
guess we
referring to.
will.
Silva has. So I wonder what you guys think of it. She has like 5 chapters from her point of view in the book. Is that weird? I mean, I'm not going to change it at this point. It is the way it is.
Well, she's not the main character, but her perspective is appreciated when it's needed. So.
Yeah.
She needs equal chapters. She's a character. Get over yourself. Get out of the comments. I see you.
Oh, the SJW. I'm stopping now.
Careful, you. Be very
Me?
careful. Yes,
No.
you. And I'm pointing to the person behind your shoulder.
We have a lituation.
Situation.
It sparks joy.
That was great. That was great,
Get the
Brandon.
gun.
I'm glad you came up with that.
That was great. That's why you're here. Among many
Yes,
other
yes,
things. That's why you're
yes.
here.
Yes, I was put on this earth for something, and bad puns is this.
You were
That
put on
is
this earth
is
for a
it.
lituation.
We have a lituation.
As you
Oh,
say,
Brandon,
you
the Lich Stalker.
Yeah. What?
I couldn't help but notice that your warranty's expired. Huh?
Pip, sure, yeah, why not?
Okay, do we want to do another one?
It is Novi 28. So,
Yep, that made no sense to me.
yeah,
Okay, let's do another one.
one more. Chapter 19, More Clean Up. You need a hyphen.
That's gonna need some help.
Boop.
It's supposed to be cleaning up.
More clean up. No, it's clean up now. Clean up.
Okay,
clean
I
up.
don't really care. I'm really tired of writing.
Clarence awoke to the sound of someone walking over bones. As you do. They clunked and clattered with every step, the ominous sound growing louder as the steps neared. His candle had gone out, and he was in pitch blackness. Had the lich returned? Clarence checked his pop-up. A little of the tension in his shoulders left when he saw his man was back. Eyes in the direction of the door, Clarence prepared his bone-shattering hex. He sighed with relief when a familiar voice called out. You know it's a bad day when you're sighing with relief when you recognize the voice of a wanted killer.
Of the
You
Necro
down
Killer.
here, boy? Unfortunately, I am, Clarence called back, relieved. Then was surprised he was relieved. Man, I am Clarence. A faint light shone on the wall of the tunnel. Clarence stepped out of the study and found the Necro Killer walking towards him from the well. I read the well like well and not well. Good grief. The Necro Killer walking
That just made me
towards
think
him
of your joke.
from the. That's a good one. Lantern in hand. I'm just gonna. I know this is incorrect, but I'm capitalizing that W so I know that it's a well and not well.
Okay.
How did you get down here, boy? And what happened to my undead? Clarence gave a brief explanation of what happened, because the readers were already there and that didn't make sense to rewrite that, and showed the Necrokiller the study. The Necrokiller frowned deeply as he studied the little room and the thousands of scattered bones in the tunnel. Where did the skeleton's bones fall? The Necrokiller asked. There, Clarence pointed to the spot right outside the door, now covered in a sea of bones. The Necrokiller let out a long sigh. You, my young friend, you, my young friend, ran into a lich, the dead owner of this hellhole. Ah, you're going to have to break all those bones, preferably with your necromancy. I don't have time to help, and we can't risk him coming back again. Liches are very dangerous. You should be dead. But it seems he was mostly out of mana when he found you. What is a lich? Clarence asked. The Necrokiller's face took on the look of disgust. It is the essence of a dead necromancer that bonds with its dead bones. They can take over other people's bodies and feed off the mana to postpone complete death. They hide among the living, creating undead armies and kill and capture people so they can harvest more and more mana, increasing their longevity and in turn insanity. As long as their bones are intact, with trace amounts of mana, there's a chance someone could spill some blood on them, and then they could come back to life. Clarence hesitated, then asked, "How would you know if it's possessing someone?" The Necrokiller shrugged. "They go insane, for one, act out of character. You didn't spill any blood on it, did you?" "No?" The Necrokiller waved his hand dismissively. "Then I think you're fine. If it somehow did get a bit of your blood, I could break the bond, but the sooner you tell me, the better. If you have strange dreams, if you start doing morbid things in your sleep, that can be an indication." "Great," Clarence muttered. "I have a guest for you to take care of, but first I need to explore these tunnels and deal with any unpleasant creatures the Lich may have left. Go get cleaned up. My guest is in the cell at the foot of the stairs. Don't say anything to her. I will introduce you when I get back." Roommate. Clarence climbed out of the well using the rope the Necrokiller tossed down the pit. He had incredible upper arm strength, just like me, the reader. Identical muscular bodies. He walked through the laboratory, feeling tired and worn, but not too tired because he was super muscular. He reeked of filth, and spending a couple days in his work clothes hadn't helped either. As he approached the first cell at the bottom of the stairs, he saw that there was someone there. The prisoner got up from the cobblestone floor, moving toward the door. Mindful of the Necrokiller's order not to speak to the prisoner, and mostly not wanting to be associated with him, Clarence didn't look towards the person in the cell and kept walking. A familiar voice stopped him in his tracks. "Clarence?" He almost stopped in surprise, recognizing the voice. He heard Silva's gasp before, then she exclaimed softly, "Good angel, he's turned you into one of his undead." He almost turned back, but he was already going up the stairs, and anyways, she was Albion's daughter, and Albion wasn't his friend. And he wasn't sure Silva could be trusted. So he just kept going up the stairs and didn't break composure until he was up to the main ballroom. Classic. Then he stood silently, mind racing wildly. Silva? Why was Silva here? Almost immediately he regretted not saying anything to her. It would have been worth the Necrokiller's anger, especially since it would soon be clear they already knew each other. Guilt hung over him like a dark cloud he couldn't shake, even as he went to grab a spare set of moth-eaten clothes and headed out to the ocean. The ocean water had been cold and sharp, but he was clean, and that left him feeling better. He stood in the kitchen, enjoying the heat of the small hearth fire as he roasted fish.
No.
A bunch of vegetables stewing
Pause.
in a pot to one side.
Pause.
Did I read something wrong?
No, just
Was
between
Dobby
those
a
two
bad-
paragraphs, he gets clothes from somewhere. He's in the ocean, out of the ocean, and then in the kitchen.
Yeah, he speed ran life for the day. Okay.
Yeah, I'm probably not gonna change it, but it's a little.
Bam. You know, sometimes there's a montage.
It's true.
He just had a bad day, and sometimes days are like that where you're like, I'm here now. Wow. You know. Find anything fun down there? Clarence asked. No, it was less than pleasant. There were many splicelings, and I had to destroy them. You will need to clean them out as well. Of course. He was the unfortunate apprentice with the most powerful necromancer in all the world, and his main job was picking up body parts. Mood. But first our guest will need to be taken care of, and you will need to shatter all those bones and toss them in the ocean. I will get you some gloves. We don't need that lich to show back up. He's cost me more than enough already. The Necrokiller groaned, rubbing his eyes. About the girl in the dungeon, why did you bring her? Clarence asked. The Necrokiller snatched up an onion from a nearby box and took a bite. Oh, fresh onion. Psychopath! She was in the wrong place at the right time. But this works out. You need a mage to duel with. Duel? Clarence asked cynically. He was not going to fight and kill Silva. True, he didn't know her well, but it didn't matter who the Necrokiller brought back. He wasn't going to kill anyone just to improve his necromancy. The Necrokiller slammed a fist down on the table. Your holier-than-thou condescending tone and innuendos are getting tiresome, boy. Deal with it, Clarence raised his voice. I don't think it's unreasonable to question your motives. You're the necro killer. The man got up, and for a second Clarence thought he wasn't going to live to regret his words. But the man walked past him and pulled a very dusty bottle of wine from the cupboard, popping the cork with his teeth and pouring 2 chipped glasses, one for himself and one for Clarence. We have a long day, and the girl needs food. Dealing with splicelings always puts me in a foul mood. He took a long sip of wine and looked at Clarence, noticing his unwillingness to touch the glass. I don't drink, Clarence muttered. And why is that? Is it you don't drink, or you won't drink with me? The older man looked at him. Well, you make a compelling point, but seeing as I have agreed to be your prodigy, that's not it. Don't let it get to your head, boy. The man took another gulp. My parents were drunks. I don't want to end up like them. The necro killer nodded. Makes sense. Doesn't seem like they did you any favors. The words stung, but they were true. Being raised with an alcoholic mother and a drug-addicted father wasn't great. This may be a new world, but that didn't change who or what his parents were. Done with the conversation, Clarence stood and began preparing a separate plate of food. He started hunting around for a tray, giving a huff of satisfaction upon finding one on a top cupboard. You're going to give that to her? The necro killer asked, helping himself to a second cup of wine. Clarence eyed the man in the corner of his eye. I was hoping you would, actually. The last time I saw her, it was complicated. You know her? The man didn't blink, taking another bite of raw onion. As I said, it's complicated, Clarence muttered. The necro killer studied him a second, then snorted. Taking a final sip of wine to wash down the onion, he stood and took the tray. I guess even someone like you could have lady troubles. But you'll have to feed her while I'm gone, and she stays in her cell. Don't think she won't kill you if she gets out. Clarence couldn't help but laugh. All right, but there's no real threat of that. She thinks I'm one of your undead minions anyway. Huh. That might explain why she was less talkative when I came back up. Are you going to tell her otherwise? Clarence shook his head. No, I think I would rather think I'm dead. I think I would rather her think I'm dead. The man raised an eyebrow at him, and he turned toward to leave the kitchen. Do what you want, but you will have to give up the charade sometime. Like I said, she's going to be your dueling partner. Like I said, that sounds like a terrible idea, Clarence said. It'll be fine. I'm not going to let you hurt each other. He paused in the entryway with a wolfish grin. Much. Clarence shook his head, taking his plate, and headed for his alcove in the ballroom. Good grief. Ballroom. The next morning, the necro killer was gone. Clarence, who was in the habit of skipping breakfast, figured the witch might want something to eat, so he kindled the fire to warm the leftover soup. He then took a handful of charcoal along with a stack of yellowed papers and colored wax candles he found in the mansion to the lighthouse. Oh, for a second, I thought he was going to take coloring stuff to Silva, but that didn't make any sense. The little girl seemed to be doing better. There were ripped pages covered in muddy drawings scattered all over the cell. Clarence sighed. He had meant to read a few of those books. It was a little late now. The girl was lying on her back, staring out the window. How's it going? Clarence asked. She looked over and got up quickly. You're still not dead. She smiled genuinely at him. Clarence pushed the papers and drawing implements under the bars and jumped back when the girl reached out to touch his hand. His health bar still hadn't recovered from her last touch. He was beginning to think the health loss was a permanent thing. Why can't I touch you? The girl asked, looking hurt. Your sickness hurt me a bit last time you touched me, Clarence said gently. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just want to know you're real, she said, pulling her new items into her lap. Well, I am real. You can tell because I brought you some wax and paper to draw on. Do dreams bring you things? She shrugged. I don't know. Well, they can't, so I'm real. Now, tell me what you've been up to. Though she always insisted that as a prisoner there was nothing interesting to possibly share, she had a lot to say when she got started. Lately, apparently, her biggest source of entertainment had been the sea dragons outside her tower. He listened with amused interest as she told him about the latest sea dragons she had seen. 2 had apparently fought and 1 ran away. Clarence didn't know how much of what she said was real, or if any of it was. Perhaps it was all made up, daydreams of a child. In any case, listening made her happy. "What have you been doing?" she asked, bringing him out of his thoughts. "Not much," he shrugged. "Just cleaning. There's a lot of trash in the mansion that needs to be dumped out." She nodded, like she just learned something new. "I didn't know sea dragons like trash." "What?" Clarence asked. "I've been watching you dump stuff off the cliff. The dragons seem to like it very much. I thought you were feeding them." "You're joking," Clarence said in disbelief. "Nope. They're eating the trash you've been throwing in the ocean." She wagged a finger. A chill ran up Clarence's spine. He had been covered in that filth when he bathed in the ocean. It wasn't that far from where he was dumping the remains. He looked at the girl, trying to decide if this was real or something she imagined. He stood up, trying to look nonchalant. "Well, thanks for telling me. I've got to go now. We have a visitor in the mansion, and I need to bring them breakfast." "All right, try not to die," the little girl said with in an almost disinterested tone, breaking one of the candles in half, pulling out the string. Shaking his head at her, Clarence walked back to the mansion. That other day in the ocean, he was a well-marinated snack, and he didn't even know it. After serving up the warm soup into a bowl, Clarence headed to the dungeon, trying to do his best undead impression. Keeping his steps rigid, he set the bowl on the ground and pushed it under the bars of the cell. He was aware of Silva watching him from the back of the cell, but he didn't look at her or give any indication that he wasn't doing anything than following orders. She never moved, even as he headed down the cells to start shattering bones in the underground tunnel. Upon reaching the well, the hairs on his neck stood up. He didn't want to go down there again. They didn't stick up for long, however, as the sound of Silva crying softly to herself drifted through the cells. He sat on the lip of the well, feeling defeated. Having lived on Earth as well as this planet, he was starting to think suffering and hardships were just part of existence. There we go. It was just part of existence. There wasn't a place anyone could run to and hide to avoid them. The young woman's crying only seemed to compound the fact that he felt a pang of guilt. "I need to slow down." She had been decent for a mage, and he didn't like that he was complicit in her capture. After a while, the crying trailed off, and Clarence lowered himself down into the tunnel. Clarence started his work at the end of the bone spill, so he could throw the shattered bones behind him. That way, he could keep the shattered and the non-shattered bones separate. These bones were tough. Each large bone took half a mana box, and there were thousands that needed to be broken. He spent most of his time reading the book on dragons, waiting while his mana regenerated. And it did not mention sea dragons. After 8 hours and about 29 bones, he climbed out of the pit. Walking stiffly past the cell, he picked up the empty bowl as he went by. She appeared to be asleep. Clarence went upstairs and started on dinner. And so a few weeks passed, Clarence making meals and pretending to be a zombie for Silva, then talking with and telling fictional stories to the cursed girl. Stories about a faraway land with cars and planes, a place devoid of magic. A fact the little girl contested whenever he brought up strange things like phones, thin boxes that could call people as long as you had the magic number that belonged to them. The Necrokiller was gone for the most part on his errands. He didn't have the time to train Clarence. He just told him to keep breaking bones and he would bring back a mage for him to practice healing on soon enough. He reassured Clarence that he would make time to teach him how to duel, but right now he needed to get more pressing matters done. It reminded Clarence of his mom, and he didn't put a lot of weight into the man's promises. The man did, however, have time to sit and talk with Silva. It was good, Clarence supposed. She needed human connection, considering her only companion was a zombie. She was clearly more upbeat the days the Necrokiller spent time with her. Clarence tried not to care too much, but the conversation with an 8-year-old left him wanting conversation with someone a bit more mature. He supposed he could start talking to Silva, but he had been playing a mindless servant for weeks now. That ice was not one he was eager to break. That was a grave of your own digging, buddy. The one benefit from all the bone crushing was that his mana capacity was growing. After about 3 weeks, his mana store had gotten bigger. He'd gone up from 6 to 9, and he felt his cooldown had also decreased. It still took a long time to regenerate, but he was gradually starting to make more and more progress on the bone pile downstairs. His pop-up now read level 3 instead of 1. Clarence set down a dinner plate for Silva and scooted under the cell door. It wasn't bad today, if he did say so himself. He had caught a large fish, which he had then seared on a frying pan in butter and spices that the Necrokiller had brought back from his various trips. "Never told me where you were from," Silva said, sounding sad as she took off the plate. Ignoring her, Clarence straightened and turned slowly toward the stairs. Her off-the-cuff comment made him uncomfortable. He hadn't thought she really cared to know, and the sadness in her voice made his heart wrench. He says I'm not a political tool to get back at my father. I don't know that I believe him, though I'm not sure that it matters. Either way, I'm in this cell, talking to the corpse of the only druid boy brave enough to ask for a dance with the daughter of the most powerful and feared mage on the planet, and her voice faded to a whisper, I wish he hadn't caught you. She choked back a small sob as he went up both flights of stairs and entered the great ballroom. The sounds of her quiet weeping seemed to echo through the castle, hitting him like a knife to the chest.
Big mood.
Yeah, big mood.
Composure.
Big mood.
That's really sad within that context. Moving on. Actually, is there good?
So yeah, we can be done.
That's a good pausing point.
Any thoughts, Brandon, before we close up shop?
No thoughts.
Okay, sounds good. Well, we're glad you all enjoyed this episode of the
Whatever
the Infamous Storytellers podcast, where the
I just
infamous storyteller neither spells nor tells stories.
He just writes books.
just writes books.
That's how infamous he is.
But the infamous author seems a little bit presumptuous, don't you think?
It really does. Let's not get we wanted to tone it down.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Anyway, y'all have a good night. We'll see you later.
Yeah. Are we done?